Or should I just ready to operate here in front of me? Hey, quick. That's okay, I'll just. Can everyone hear me without using the mic?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. I sang in chorus in high school, and you learn to project your voice, and that's something that has stuck with me throughout my life. And one of my high school friends who sang in chorus with me came here to see me tonight, and I'm quite honored, and I see him giggling because he knows what I'm talking about right now. So, but anyways, good evening. Thank you for having me. I did come down from St. Mark's National Wildlife Refuge. I can't rave enough about it. If you have not been there, you need to. You have not experienced real Florida until you have been to the Forgotten Coast, and which it's right in the middle of it. So we'll go on and jump into this, go through a few things. So my name is Scott Davis. I work at St. Mark's. I am a ranger. I am a botanist. I do a lot of different things. I work with U.S. Fish, with FDEP, with lots of nonprofits. I'm the chapter representative for the Tallahassee chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. So I'm involved in a lot of different things. Those numbers at the bottom, those are all the places I've lived in my life. So I started in the 305 in South Florida and moved around, and now I reside at the 850 in North Florida. So I don't really like to talk about myself too much because I have a lot of material to cover with PowerPoint. So we're here to talk about monarch butterflies and milkweeds. And although it may seem like a simple subject, as I'm sure many of you grow milkweeds in your yard and see monarchs, monarchs and milkweeds alike are facing a lot of really complicated issues that are causing both of them to decline sharply across the United States, across North America. And the fixes, however, to those complicated problems are quite easy. And we'll talk about that tonight. So just understand that the monarch butterfly has undergone a precipitous decline in the last 20 years. And by that I mean 95+% of the population has disappeared in a relatively short period of time. And so this species may be listed next year, pending further investigation by the federal government. However, we're not dealing with a Florida panther. We're not dealing with black bears. We're not dealing with controversial species where you need a lot of private and public stakeholders to come to the table to do something about this issue. We're dealing with something where we all pitch in, both in our backyards and working with our local government to address issues along roadsides and power line right-of-ways. Will fix the problem and halt the decline right then and there. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. All of us work together, we can bring the monarch back across its range. And so for me, and for most botanists that I know, we engage in what is generally known as NASCAR botany. And so we drive up and down the roads, both rural and urban routes, and you learn very quickly to be able to identify plants or populations of plants by the shape of the blur as you drive down the road. And so you don't even have to look at it. Like, you just see it out of your periphery and you know what it is, and you're skidding off the road to go back and look at it to see what's going on. So a typical day for me is that. And here is what appears to be just a ruderal looking semi-overgrown roadside, but I saw something that prompted me to stop and pull over. And when I did, I continued to get closer, and then a little closer, and a little closer. And what I'm looking at here is an undocumented, unknown population of sandhill milkweed, Asclepias humistrata. Many individuals growing there along this roadside with hundreds, if not thousands of cars driving by every day, no one knowing they're there. But in addition to not knowing that those milkweeds were there, upon further investigation, you can tell that people also did not know that these little guys were there also. And that these caterpillars had hatched from eggs from adults that had just recently returned from Mexico, who had arrived following a migratory route that we'll talk about in a little bit, and lay their eggs on these milkweeds on this roadside. And so I had to go ahead and contact the FDOT District Vegetation Manager and tell them that we have a population of milkweeds that are in an area where I suspect they're probably being mowed too frequently, and if you mow them at the wrong time, you're going to prevent the plants from reproducing and creating seeds, and you're likely to kill and remove vegetation for any monarchs that are there. And so using a county wildflower resolution, which has been adopted widely around the state by numerous counties, and I actually need to update this for this year because there are a number of other counties that have also petitioned their county commissioners to adopt wildflower resolutions. You're able to, with that resolution, go to FDOT in your county and say, we want these roadsides to be on a reduced mow schedule. And so we were able to successfully implement that with that roadside and many others, save the plants and save those monarchs that are depending on them because they're not finding plants in a lot of other places these days other than roadsides. And so the reason why these plants are so important is because monarch butterflies are larval host obligates to milkweeds. They cannot lay their eggs on any other type of plant except for plants that are in the milkweed family, mostly milkweeds. And so without milkweeds, monarchs disappear. They simply cannot reproduce. Adults may find a lot of wildflowers in our backyards and along roadsides, but that doesn't mean they're finding suitable host plants to lay their eggs on. And so other very well-known larval host obligate species that we see, we have the gold fritillary and the zebra longwing, which are both obligates to passion vine, plants in the genus Passiflora. We have the giant swallowtail, which here in Central Florida, old-timers call them orange dogs because they lay their eggs on lots of citrus trees. They rely on plants that are in the citrus family, including native citrus trees that are here. The spicebush swallowtail, that also includes the Palomede swallowtail. If you do not have something that's in the sassafras family, red bay, swamp bay, sassafras, spicebush, or camphor tree, these butterflies will disappear, as will zebra swallowtails, which depend on pawpaws. Without pawpaws, they disappear. So lots of larval host obligate species, but none of these are suffering as harshly as the monarch is right now. So milkweeds are in the genus Asclepias, a name that plant taxonomists decided was appropriate for milkweeds because these plants were so powerful and important to people. And so they named it after Asclepius, a Greek entity that symbolized and embodied healing and good well-being, high well-being. And for a long time, milkweeds were very important to people. We use them as a source of food after cooking and processing. We would use them to extract cordage for rope and clothing. And up until the 1930s, we would use the comas, or the silky material in the seed pods, as something to stuff our pillows or our beds. As a matter of fact, the milkweed industry producing those comas for our beds and our pillows was lobbied against by the cotton industry, which worked to kind of put it under, and then cotton began to take over during that time period. So milkweeds are in the Apocynaceae. They're in the dogbane family, the oleander family. So it includes plants like oleander, Confederate jasmine, frangipani, a number of these that are all in that same family. However, those are in different genera. The genus Asclepias comprises the majority of the plants that monarch butterflies depend upon across their range in the world. That's a population of aquatic milkweed growing in a swamp floodplain. That's one of our few species that really likes dark, dank environments. Most of them do not like that, but that species does. So just to kind of illuminate to you the kind of diversity that we're dealing with milkweeds in the state that you may not be aware of, we have 21 native milkweed species spread out throughout the state, including 2 endemic species with a primary range right here in Central Florida. Now, this is not all 21 of those species, but these are all of the species that I find within 5 miles of my house in North Florida. Just to illuminate to you the high degree of diversity and evolution that has occurred to create all of these different milkweeds that occupy very distinct natural communities across the state of Florida. They're just dazzling, they're beautiful. It just makes my day to see these plants doing well. because of what they mean in so many ways. So the vegetative morphology. You may see a milkweed, but not even realize you're seeing one. A lot of people would probably dismiss the plant on the left as a blazing star, as a liatris, because that's what it looks like prior to flowering. And so not all of them look just like that typical opposite paired leaf morphology there on the right, but many of them do. In addition to trying to figure out if you're looking at a milkweed or not, one of the primary ways to do that I find, I'm trying to spec down the laser here, and I think I have failed to find the laser. So if you see a node, an elevated ridge, that's in the area next to where the leaves are at, that's a major indicator that you're looking at a milkweed species. Probably the primary way that people use to determine if they're looking at a milkweed is to break the leaf to see if it exudes latex sap. Most species will do this, but one of our most common species does not. Butterfly milkweed, Asclepias tuberosa, it actually does not exude white latex sap, which that's yet another reason why you cannot just use this test to determine if you're looking at a milkweed. For me, I see these milkweeds usually best if I spot all of those little spiky projections on the side of the road, and those are follicles, better known as seed pods, seed-bearing fruit on the plants, and they're very noticeable. I tend to like plants that are spiky, like yuccas or cacti, and seeing these spikish organs on these plants always catches my eye. Whenever they dehiss or ripen, they will open, and then a lot of people actually think that they're seeing cotton on the side of the road. A lot of people that I know that are just getting into plants will send me pictures and say, hey, I didn't know cotton grew here in Florida. And it's usually a milkweed that they're looking at. That seed pod splits open, and then for most species of milkweed, the seeds are dispersed by wind. And those little cottony structures called comas will disperse them across the landscape to hopefully a suitable place to germinate. And so that's a little bit of a close-up. So they do look pretty similar to cotton in a lot of ways. The flower structures are very distinct on milkweeds, and their pollination is very, very complicated. So they almost look like these weird creatures out of a science fiction movie. They have those horns at the top, and then the hoods that are flanking the horns. And then they have these interesting slits on the side called stigmatic slits. So pollination, if you haven't already figured it out by looking at this picture, is very complicated. It's not as simple as a dusting of pollen and pollination has succeeded. That actually does not happen with any milkweed species. So in order for pollination to happen on milkweeds in your yard or anywhere out in the wild, first and foremost, realize that milkweeds are not self-compatible. You need at least 2 sexually distinct plants in your yard to be cross-pollinated in order to produce fertile seeds. If you have 1 plant, it's not going to produce viable seeds. You must have at least 2 there in order to do that. And so if you see seed pods, but you only see 1 plant, it's very likely there is another plant somewhere within range for a pollinator to move back and forth in between them. So for pollination to occur, a specialist insect needs to land on the flower, and often it is bees. It's also often beetles. And when they land on the flowers, they have to accidentally stick their leg into that slit that I talked about earlier. And they get stuck. Many of them are not able to free themselves, or they end up losing an appendage. However, many, many more are able to break free. And when they break free, this one hasn't exactly broken free yet, you will see that all over their legs are these little yellow projections, these little yellow lobes. And those are pollen sacs. Whenever the leg breaks free, they yank out a pollen sac. So they don't make pollen, they make pollen sacs. Then that bee, or that pollinator, who is so intoxicated by the aroma of milkweed flowers, cannot help themselves but to land on another milkweed to pursue nectar. And when they do, and if they reinsert their leg and get stuck again in the slit of another milkweed, pollination is successful. So they have to stick their leg in that slit. And here's a photograph that took me quite some time to photograph because it was an epic macro shot. of a bunch of pollinia, including one that had been successfully inserted into that stigmatic slit. So pollination was a success on this flower. And just for scale, to show you how small they are, imagine how hard it is to try to manually cross-pollinate milkweeds. When you're dealing with pollen sacs that are this small, you're trying to pull them out of the flower and reinsert them into another, and it's not easy. It's almost impossible. So if pollination is successful with a milkweed, you will see that the stalk of the flower begins to widen and get thicker, and then the flower will begin to curve. It'll recurve up. So that one there in the middle is broadening and curving upwards, which indicates that it has been successfully pollinated. The flower just above it was not successfully pollinated, and so it is going to fall off and not do anything. And so that's how you know if you have had successful pollination and potential seed production. Seed production is interesting, and this is a point of argument and debate with FDOT and with power companies, because you come in and you say that you have to leave this alone for such and such time, and they say that we really don't want to leave it alone for such and such time. And this gets really interesting because some milkweeds only require a month to produce viable seed pods, whereas other milkweeds can require up to 7 months for a seed pod to develop, which means that roadside has to be left alone for more than half the year in order for those plants to produce viable seed pods. And it's really hard to get an agency to feel motivated to leave a roadside alone for that long of a period of time. So we have found in our seed collections, when they do dehisce, that hair ties are an invaluable tool in this process, because if you have a plant here or a plant there, because they've become so rare, and you don't have the time to drive 60 miles every day back and forth to check on this plant, you can typically conveniently put a hair tie on the follicle, forming a figure 8, and when it dehisces, it'll split open, but it will prevent the seeds from blowing away. And then you can come back and you can collect a percentage of those for research and conservation, which is what we do. So that's some background on milkweeds. So now you're quick and dirty on monarch butterflies.